You know the Showers, Cheryl, and I don't know, Bob? I don't know what they're right over here on this table. Don't know if you noticed in the bulletin a week or two ago, we talked about a miracle that Bob claimed. Yeah, and so they haven't been in this community for a while. Silverton, they moved decades ago. We kind of know when they had kids. Yeah, I don't think I'm even recording it, maybe. I don't think I'm recording it. We'll see. We will. Yeah. Somebody will explain it to us.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Great.
All right, yes, here we are. Here we are. Thanks for coming. We're going to jump right into an opening prayer and get started. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's try to be here now. The place where everything happens, but the place that never seems like it's enough. We always hope the future is going to be better, but all that is needed for happiness, for wholeness, for freedom is in the now. So loving God, we seek to accept this now, this moment, where you are and where we want to be. We thank you for all who have gathered here as we come seeking your wisdom. We ask for your guidance, and we ask that we can be good listeners to the Holy Spirit. We pray gratefully in Jesus' name. Amen. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, last time we talked about this big question of who am I? And what does it mean to be me? What's the essential nature of my being? As we talked about that and developed it, we discussed this idea of this aware presence, that we're always present and always aware, no matter what. And that aware presence is our soul. You know, every now and then there's an event that happens in our life, and when it happens, we know, like, I have to attend to this. I can't just let this go. I can't really wait any longer. I need to deal with this now. An event like that happened to me on Saturday night. I was getting ready to go to Mass, and I pulled out my all the way out, and it landed on the floor. And I looked at it there, and I looked at the time, and I thought, well, I think I got enough time. So I picked it up, and then I tried to kind of like push it back in. And you know, a drawer in a dresser, there's just a sweet spot, you know? If you get it right, it just glides in. But if you don't get it right, you kind of push, and it kind of stops, and then it won't, and then, no, that's not the right thing. So you pull it back out, then you try it again, and then you get the one where it goes all the way in, but it's kind of crooked. And so you're like, oh, I know that isn't it. That's not the sweet spot. And so I worked on it, and I kind of started having this conversation like, how long am I going to do this? I mean, I can't stay here all night. I mean, I got a place I need to be, but at the same time, I can't let a drawer like defeat me. There's got to be a way. It's just not that complex. I mean, I'm not a Mr. Fix-It kind of a guy. I don't know how to fix or do anything, but I think I could put a drawer back in, And finally, after many, attempts, finally, all of a sudden, it went right in. It just glided in. It's like, I don't know if you've ever, got on a canoe, and that first push away from the shore, and you're just gliding. And there's something just magical about that moment. There it is. And so I had that experience. I pushed it in, it glided in, I just, there it is. I mean, these things in our life that we have to attend to, that there's, a reason like, I gotta do this. And I don't want to my own life. Understanding who I am was a moment I knew I could never go back. I can't look at anything the same anymore. I just know there's this reality to my being that I have to attend to. And that if I live from that place, then I don't have to go seeking peace and happiness outside of myself. It's right here. And when it's right here within me, that means it can never be apart from me. As God was having this conversation within the Trinity, deciding what's this creation gonna look like? I imagine they had this conversation about how are we going to create, what's going to be the nature of this pinnacle of our creation, this human. And they knew that love was never going to allow them to control every moment of our life. As St. Paul tells us, love is to not insist on having our own way. So if God's going to create in love, and of course, the only thing God ever does is love. If God's going to create in love, God has to give us freedom. If God's going to insist on God's way, then we're going to become, a bunch of robots just doing whatever God has forced us to already do. And we know that, of course, isn't the case. And so then once we've got a creation who's getting to do their own thing, then of course there's going to be problems. There's going to be things that happen where the creation acts in a way that would be contrary to what God would have hoped for in the moment. So how is God going to deal with that? We think of our own families, children if you have them, grandchildren, and you think, we want them to live these peaceful, happy lives, but we know us controlling every minute of their life isn't going to make that happen. So God then, in deciding, He didn't just turn us free and say, well, whatever happens, happens. We'll just have to make the best of it. Instead, God chooses to create us with an immortal soul. An immortal soul. And now you would think, okay, well, they're going to be immortal, so maybe we can just go with the fact that maybe they'll have some rough times on earth, but after they die, they can come to heaven, and then everything can be beautiful there, and it'll all be okay. But God didn't stop with just giving us an immortal soul. God then said, we're going to dwell within that soul. Now, God has given us everything that we need to deal with any circumstances that ever could arise in our life. So instead of micromanaging every moment of your life, and trying to always be fixing everything and doing everything, God just said, let's take care of it right from the beginning. Let's give them the capacity in their own being to deal with every circumstances that will come up in their life from a place of peace and happiness. And so God gives us this immortal soul. God chooses to dwell within our soul, and God is happiness. So that means we have it within us already. Now we no longer have to go out searching around. If I could only go there, if I could only catch that, then I would finally have the happiness I'm seeking. We already have it within us because God chose to create us this way. It is who we are. And if we can come to terms with that, if we start to really think about it, we realize, well, this is going to change everything for me. Once I come to realize I'm this immortal being and God dwells within me, then I have this question, what's that going to look like in my day-to-day life? And to understand what it looks like in the day-to-day, we have to understand what is the nature and the qualities of this immortal soul that we are. And we talked about this last time, how this quality of never changing, this aware presence that no matter what happens in your life is always standing there brightly shining in that moment as aware and present. And if you have something that doesn't change, that means that that thing, whatever it is, has no needs. It doesn't need anything. Because it doesn't need it to be a sunny day for your soul to be at peace. It doesn't need to be a super exciting event for you to be happy and at peace. This unchanging quality is really the keystone to living from a place where no matter what is going on, no matter the stress of the daily life, I can always come back to this place within my own being that is going to be peaceful and happy. It's a beautiful place to live from. Teresa of Avila says there's nothing more beautiful than a soul in union with God. And we recognize that God is living from this place within us. So since my drawing skills are so good, I thought I'd share some more with you. So last time we drew a tree. This time I'm going to draw our soul. Now we know that anything that you do or say ultimately about our soul and God is not going to be right. You know, this is an example, and it can't be exactly what it is because there's no way to describe your soul. I mean, your soul doesn't have a height, a weight, you know, it doesn't have any preferences for colors and all this other stuff. So this is my interpretation of what the great saints of our tradition have tried to tell us about what's going on with our soul. So I imagine our soul is a big circle, okay? And now this big circle of our soul didn't just come from nothing. I mean, it has to come from something. And so down here, we have all of this activity of God down here in what some of the mystics would call the Godhead, or the ground of being. So from God, God has to create the soul, and then God has to give this soul power. So we have this power coming up out of God to create the soul. And then within the soul, I'm drawing this square. And when they talk about what the soul can do, what you can do as a person, they use some funny terminology like the powers of the soul or the faculties. It might be more simply understood as what is your abilities? What are your abilities as a person? What can you do because you have a soul versus what the table you're sitting at cannot do? So some of these are our intellect. And our memory. And our will. And our senses. So we have all this power from God coming up into us. And inside of the square, I'm going to draw another circle. This is where God is dwelling. Okay, so we have the Godhead. Out of the Godhead is coming creation. And creation is fueling everything. I mean, nothing exists outside of God. I think we all would agree to that in this room. That, there isn't like the infinity of God here and then something over here that's not. I mean, by very definition, if something is infinite, there can't be something else somewhere else. So everything has to be within God. So God has created the soul and given the soul powers. And these powers we use then are these abilities that we have so we can think, and we have our memories, we have our senses, and the ability to act. And so a simple example of this would be, we look and you can see this exit sign up here. And you look at it and you say, hey, that's a green exit sign. You're using your senses, the sense of sight, coming into your being. And then you're using your memory that tells you that color is green because you've been told that since you were this big, and you've come by your memory to understand that. Now, if there was a fire going on right now, then your will would say, let's get out of here, let's use the exit, and we would all stampede out, but we would all walk very gently and quietly out the door. Our intellect would say, don't run. It's better to be, calm in the situation. So we can see how we use all of these powers all at once, and we're using them constantly all the time. Okay? So this power coming up from God never stops. The minute of your conception, God is fusing together body and soul to be separated only at death. So as soon as you're created, then this never-ending power of God is entering into you. I mean, if God stopped doing that, you would just cease to exist. It wouldn't be like if God stopped wanting you, that you would fall down and die. You would literally just no longer exist. But this power is coming up and it's constant. It's never-ending. And then the power then, it comes into us, and then we start using it. And so most of us end up using most of the power through the senses, right? Sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, all of that stuff. And we use that, and that takes us out into the world. And so most of our use of these abilities that we have take us out. Unfortunately, what happens is that when we go out from ourselves, especially with the senses, we're so enamored with what we see. I mean, you just watch, a little child as they discover, the world around them. Everything is exciting, and everything's like, wow, check that out, And that sensation of seeing something that's attractive, maybe you would say at your age, you don't say wow as often as you did when you were 3. It's just kind of a poverty, isn't it? I mean, don't you wish you said wow more often? That'd be kind of nice. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean you stop using your senses most of the time. So, we've drawn that chart of us going up to happiness and then back down and then seeking happiness again, and we're constantly doing this, right? So what happens is that as we go up, and then we start to come back down because, whatever that thing I was doing is no longer keeping me happy. We typically start using our senses then to seek a new experience because we're convinced that happiness comes from the content of our experience. We're not used to just sinking into ourself and knowing that happiness is within me. The content of my experience in regards to my piece of happiness is irrelevant because this is within me. And so we use the senses. What the masters tell us is that we need to turn this down. So in my drawing here, at each one of these connection points, we've got a little control valve. So I'm going to put CV for this control valve. And we're completely in charge of that. This is we get to turn that, dial it up or turn it down as much as we want. And what What the spiritual masters are saying is, especially as it relates to the senses, we need to dial that down. We need to turn that down to the lowest possible volume of the use of this unending power from God. We need to tone that down to the lowest amount necessary to still function in the world. I mean, nobody's saying, hey, let's just all go home and stare at a blank wall for the rest of our life because we know that happiness is within us. That's not it at all. It's not even remotely it. But we do need to turn that down so that this power comes unto us. And right now, for too many of us, all of that energy just goes flowing out the senses. What can I see, experience? A double chocolate ice cream tonight. Whatever it is that's doing it for us, we keep doing it and we do more and more and more. Nothing wrong with tricks and ice cream. Do them. But just try to tone it down and to recognize that peace and happiness has nothing to do with that. Now imagine if you started toning this down and then actually put it in reverse and let this activity of these powers come back within. Who are you aiming towards now? You're putting that power back into where God is dwelling within you. It's time to tone it down and then refocus where this energy is going. And if we can turn it down enough, and imagine this power just welling up within you, and I just see this as this power having a weight to it. So this soul just being airy, light, floating. And then because you kind of calm things down, now you're able to just keep that power within you, and then that power starts to sink you down. And you start to go down and down and down. And if this soul were going down, it would be sinking right back into the Godhead. Coming to this place here is where we find union with God. And what they tell us is that tone those things down and bring them within us, then ultimately we'll be one with God at this place where all the powers then become unnecessary. There's a place within you where the powers aren't going to function because you're there with God. This is why these people who have these incredible experiences come out of them and say, St. Paul's like, he has this mystical experience of being drawn up to the heavens. And he's like, I was in the body or out of the body. I mean, he doesn't know. He can't figure it out. He can't describe it to us. But he had this experience of sinking down into the Godhead. And at that place, he came back, and all he knew is that he was changed. Things are different. I can't speak about it. I can't describe it to you. But it's this unimaginable situation. One last thing regarding this chart. If we put a time scale up here, now, God is outside of time. So anytime you start, saying, okay, I'm talking about God and here's a time scale, you already know there's something wrong here. So, this is not like accurately true. But if it was, and we have one, and this is God, okay? And then we have, number 2, we have creation. And let's just call 3 me. So that's the point I've been created. I've just been conceived, and now soul, spirit, and body all is one. And then let's say 4 is my using my abilities. I want to talk about what's life like here. You've been created. Let's say you could have a conversation with this person, just conceived. And you said, who are you? They would say, I have no idea. Because they haven't used any of the powers yet. They don't have a memory. They can't draw on their memory to say, oh yeah, I was born in Medford, Oregon. They can't, they don't have that. They can't say, oh, I do this, I'm a fisherman, I love to do this. No, you've never been fishing before. never use the senses. So here you are, you exist, but what could you say in that moment? The only thing you could say to describe yourself would be, I am. I am. I exist. I'm aware, presence. At that moment, you're not aware of much, but you're present and aware. At that place, you could say, are you peaceful? Well, what could you possibly not be peaceful about? Ideas of upsetness that come to you, you haven't had the experience of any of that yet. So there hasn't been a chance for your ego to decide things and how to label stuff. Oh, this makes me upset, and this makes me happy, and I want to do this, and I don't want to do that. You haven't had any of those experiences yet. You're just at peace. This moment of I am. We're all far past 3 and 4 and moving on with our lives. And now I would say you all have been using these abilities, for decades now. And if we look very closely at what is happening as you're using these abilities, there's one thought after another after another. It's just constant. Sense perceptions, constant. All these things constantly happening. But if you could take a thought, let's say we counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. You can only have one thought at a time. It's not possible to think 1 and 2 at the same time. Now, when you're saying 1, you're going to say 2 next, but if we could break it down, if we had a supercomputer and we said, break this down by, milliseconds, there would be a spot where you finish the thought of 1 and a millisecond before you started the thought of 2. And the question is, who are you between those 2 thoughts? Because most of us use our thinking as a way to soothe the unhappiness that we're feeling throughout the day. A little nagging thought comes along, so we start thinking, how can I assuage this uneasy feeling? And most of us solve that by thinking, making a plan, getting busy, and start that roller coaster ride back up because we know we're doing something now. We're going to be able to be happy again. But if we could stop ourselves from doing that and just say, who am I? Who am I between 2 thoughts? What can you say? I am. I am. I am this aware presence within whom God dwells. And from that place, I'm at peace. Are you with me? Yeah. I am. Good. So then, if we go back to the first session that said that we talked about what the problem is, the problem is that we think we're separate from God. We think that we're living down here and God is out there somewhere. Well, if that's the case, and now we've had these conversations and we realize that the objects that we've been using, that all we've been doing is seeking happiness, we get that object, but we knew if that object was going to make us unhappy, we would say, no, I don't want the object. So we've learned that the objects aren't going to do it for us, that we're only been using them for the point of happiness. But that now we've kind of understood, oh, those objects can only bring me there temporarily, but I'm always falling back down, so I don't want that. Because what I'm after is staying up there in the happiness. And so we learned that to do that, it's this process of saying, who am I? And understanding this is who I am in union with God. And so now that we've been able to talk our way through this, that we know that we're this immortal being within whom God dwells, and that happiness that I've been seeking outside of myself, I can stop doing that because I know it's a failed project. I mean, we already know this already. You've all had plenty of experiences of trying to find happiness out of the actions of your life, and it's a failed project. It can't work. It doesn't work. You don't need me to tell you that. You already know from your own life experience that all of the activities and objects of your life haven't been able to keep you constantly and never ending in the space of peace and happiness. So this failed project. So now what do? We have this intellectual conversation. We draw pictures on the board and we think, okay, I got it. Intellectually, I understand it. So can we just turn off the lights? Let's go home? You got it. Everybody's going to be happy from now on because, we know who we are and, we just figured it out. Does that feel right? Does it sound right? You think you got it? If you leave here tonight, can you just go home and you're going to be happily ever after? Because, now when somebody cuts you off in traffic, that content of your experience can't change your happiness. So, you're not going to get bothered by these things anymore. When the boss calls you into the office and blames you for something you didn't do, you attend to that with love and intelligence, but you don't have to be crushed by it, right? Because you know that meeting with the boss has no ability to change this reality that you are peace and happiness. Doesn't matter what the boss thinks or says. You know who you are. Well, if it was that easy, boy, we would have all figured this out a long time ago. It's much more than just having the intellectual understanding, right? And so the first step, as I wrote, the first step of this recipe for happiness was to understand the reality of who we are. So I could say, I know who I am truly. I know who God is truly. And I'm going to live from that place in my life. And so then the next step is, how do I do that? How do I live from that place? It's the first question that people ask me after I've gotten through the explanation of, what it is. Hey, I want to tell you about this true self thing. And by the time I get into explaining it, they're like, okay, sounds interesting. I'll think about that a little bit. But now what am I supposed to do? That's the first question everybody, what do I do now? Because we're just so ingrained with this is how life works, We do stuff. And when we can't figure it out, then we, read a book and then we try to do what the book says. And then when that doesn't work, we try something else. We're always trying and doing and trying and doing. And this is different than that. Because this is not just the next self-help book that says, oh, try this or try that. That's not this. Because this is not about self-help. This is about self-understanding. This is about knowing. And there's a difference between an intellectual knowing and a felt understanding. And for this to become our reality, for us to really have the peace that passes understanding, this needs to go from just head knowledge to the felt understanding of who I am. Because when you get a notice from the doctor that says, hey, we need to have a follow-up discussion, and I'd like you to come in today if possible and no later than tomorrow, the anxiety is going to rise up. Unless you know who you are. And if you already have this felt understanding, I know that I am one with my God. Not just I think I can be, not I hope to be, but I know I am. How do we do that? This could be different for everybody. I would say the reality of your being that you are one with God, that God is dwelling within you at this moment and always will be. And it's this kind of awakening to the reality of your life. That's true for everybody. What then is the process to make that your felt understanding could be different? For me, what it was a couple of things. One, it was to get quiet in my prayer time. Instead of just constantly, using words and words and words, I finally, just took Jesus for what his word was quit babbling on like the pagans do. And I finally just stopped talking to God, and I started just doing this silent contemplative prayer. Just be with God. And of course, what typically happens when we all embark on that is we feel like we're a huge failure. So I tell this story where I got, this is probably a decade ago, and I went out to shop for a night to do a little adult education night. And I had heard, how important contemplative prayer was. I didn't practice it myself, so I didn't have any experience, but I read a couple books right before the meeting. And I went out there, and I grabbed the marker and started writing on the board. And to my credit, I admitted right at the very get-go, hey, I've read some books on this. It sounds like it's really great, but I don't do it myself. So I'm sure everybody who was there was like, what? This guy's going to talk about contemplative prayer and he doesn't even do it himself. So then I was like, I need to start doing this. I got to start. And so I undertook this effort, and I'm going to sit quietly and I'm going to, do this thing. And after about 3 or 4 sessions, I was like, oh, forget that stuff. My mind just goes a million miles an hour, and I'm sitting there, I'm going to be quiet and just be with God, and I'm thinking about the sporting event and what's on TV next, and what am I going to have for breakfast? I mean, it just is, the mind is never ending, right? And so because I had that failed experience, I knew this time it's got to be different. And it's not going to be God who's going to be different this time. It's got to be me who's going to be different this time. And of course, I was at a point in my life where I was just single-pointedly after a deeper relationship with God. I was after the peace that passes understanding. And I didn't want anything to get in the way of that, especially my own inability to pray. And so I just started, just sitting quietly with God. Now, the typical, little hints that are given is to have maybe a sacred word. So you have some word that you can repeat. And some people repeat that word over and over and over again for their time. A lot of people say 20 minutes is a good amount of time because it's not too long that you'll be, tempted just to skip it because you got a busy life, but it's long enough to get quiet and to enter in with God. And so you have this sacred word. They typically say don't pick a word that has a lot of intimate meaning to you because you don't want to be saying something that's going to be triggering yourself or making your mind go. So mine ended up being just this nonsense word. And I ended up, at first I was just kind of repeating it, but then I got to the point where I just say it as I recognize that my mind has been wandering. So when your mind wanders in prayer, you just have to be committed. I'm doing this no matter what. I'm putting in the 20 minutes, and I really don't care what happens in that 20 minutes. Because again, once we know this, we don't care about the content of our experience. It doesn't matter for the sake of happiness. So we've given up on trying to control our prayer life. I mean, we try to control a lot of things, and we try to control our prayer lives too. And once we've given up on that, we don't have to control our prayer life. And so I gave myself complete permission to just be, and whatever happens, happens. And when the time I designated is up, I just get on with my day. And I don't sit there and contemplate my prayer time. Because if you start contemplating your prayer time, all you're going to do is end up analyzing how terrible you are at this. You're going to say, okay, well, what did I think about this time? Okay, let's see. For 20 minutes, I had 19 minutes of thinking about all kinds of stuff and 1 minute of thinking about God. And you're just going to say that you're terrible at it and you're going to give up. Instead, what I say when I have a session like that is, hey, I'm kind of like Teresa Tabor. She said her mind wandered all the time in her prayer, So I just gave up on trying to act like I could be perfect in my prayer life. As if God is up there caring if I'm perfect in my prayer life. God understands what we're going through. He understands these minds are busy. And the fact is once you do it, that your mind does slow down. And you can become more contemplative. There was one teacher who was trying to convince people to do this, and so they had a session like this, and they said, we're going to do 20 minutes right now. I mean, imagine if I told you that. We're going to do 20 minutes right now, everybody just be quiet and sit there. But they did that. And then he had a nun come up to him afterwards, and she said, that was the worst 20 minutes of my life. I caught myself 10,000 times thinking about other things. And he said, how beautiful. You had 10,000 chances to turn back to God. Isn't that beautiful? He just took all of the power out of her discontentment and changed it into something beautiful. You know? So you can say, hey, God, you gave me this mind, so I'm just going to do what I can. And if you keep at it, it will get better. And even if after, so many people say, I tried it for 3 weeks and I gave up. Call me in 3 years. Do it for 3 years without fail, without judgment. I guarantee you 3 years from now, you would be telling people, hey, if you want to grow closer to God, if you want to know who you really are, you need a contemplative prayer life. See, we're so used to things happening so quickly. We want everything like, hey, I want it now. I mean, I only got a couple weeks of Lent left. I want it by the end of Lent, I want to just really have this deep prayer life. It's probably not going to happen that quickly. You're going to need to take some time. And you need to give yourself the grace. That's what happens here, is God gives us grace. So while the senses take us off and we're all excited about, life over here, doing everything we're doing, at some point we forget that we are coming from God and returning to God. And then God sends grace. This grace envelops us. And it reminds us of who we really are. I'm becoming convinced that grace is time. And we have all the time we need. We're dealing in eternity. Time is not, if you say, I want to be a great prayer person by, summer, I would bet you if you attended every day, by summer, you probably would be pretty great at it. At the same time, if you got to the summer and you said, yep, still not great at it, but I'm doing it, then I would say keep doing it. Because you got all the time in the world. What else are you going to do? For the rest of your life, you're going to fit into one of two categories. You're either going to be happy and at peace, or you're going to be seeking peace and happiness. That's it. Those are the two choices of life. Being at peace and being happy, or seeking it. So if you find yourself seeking it, then you have two choices as you seek happiness. You can keep doing the stuff that you know doesn't work. Keep trying to have fun times and, hey, maybe let's have another barbecue. That'll do it for me. That'll finally give me the peace that passes understanding, Or you can sink into this. You can allow yourself to just be filled with the power of God. You can turn down your use of your abilities, and you can have that power just sink you right into the Godhead. You can have this peace that passes understanding. I've got this little, I don't know how this is going to go, first time trying this one. Little device here to try to keep us thinking. Imagine this is you, a rubber band. Now this rubber band right now is not being stretched, right? It's just relaxed. I would say this is us at peace. This is us before we've become attached. Detachment is the final step in the recipe for happiness. What happens to us in our life is that we go from this place of peace and we get excited about what's going on in the world, and so we start attaching ourselves to them. So we stretch ourselves out and we wrap ourselves around an object, typically. Typically, it's going to be a person, you know? We're going to finally meet somebody, we're going to say, wow, they're the bee's knees, let's do that. And you're going to then attach yourself. And then as these two people are loving each other, they say things like, you complete me, you know? Or, I could never live without you. And all of these lovely things, you know, that we've all said and, you know, felt great saying it. So we attach ourselves to a person, and then it's not, you know, it's not too long before we decide, well, that's not really enough. So then we attach ourselves to something else, like maybe a career, or to our bank account, or to some fun experience. And then after that's not quite good enough, then we attach ourselves again to some other experience, some other object. Remember, objects are any person, place, thing, experience. The word object stands for everything that's not God. So here we are, we were peaceful and happy and relaxed, and we had to do nothing in that place. And now we've stretched ourselves out, and we've gotten attached to other people. What are we to do then? I mean, the first question legitimately be, what's the problem with being attached to people? I mean, what's the problem? Aren't I supposed to love my children? Shouldn't I, you know, be totally attached to them? And so this attachment, detachment, it's really important to get the definition right. Because what we're talking about is when you say there's an object that without which I will not be happy. So anything in your life, if you can imagine right now, in your life, that then you would say, I lost my peace. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. I mean, we don't have to go straight to the worst possible thing like a child dying or something like that. It could be something very simple. Your favorite sports team could lose the championship game. That could be a moment of despair and anxiety and stress and frustration. You non-sports people don't understand that at all. It doesn't make any sense. But the sports fans in the rooms totally get it. I just know they're like, yeah, okay, I know what he means. There's something in your life that if it doesn't go right, you're going to lose your peace. You're going to be like, I was really counting on that. Maybe it's a vacation. Maybe you've been planning, you wanted to get away, and we got to go do this. And then at the last minute, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. Maybe it's the big family gathering at Christmas, you know? And you've got all the expectations riding on it, and then, you know, 4 out of the 5 families that were coming home got COVID on, you know, the day before, and now nobody's there, or you're just there with the uncles that you don't really like, you know. Something, we're all attached to something. There's an object out there that we are attached to, and as long as we're attached to that, then that's going to get in the way with union with God. Because ultimately, anything other than God is really no thing. What we're after is union with God. When we're feeling our, like, you know, best, holiest, you know, most pious selves, and we're talking to the people we love closely, we say, well, God comes first. I mean, you know, I gotta love God first. Whether we actually live that way in our real lives is a different story, but you know, when we're feeling like I want to be like this good, righteous person, God comes first. God does come first. Not that I expect any of you to disagree with that, but ask yourself, does your life reflect that reality? That God comes first? I mean, what does a life look like if God comes first? And the idea of dealing with this attachment, detachment is if you're attached to something in an inordinate way, that means that you're relying upon that object to make you happy, instead of relying upon God dwelling within you to make you happy. So when we say you need to be detached from these things, it's a matter of turning ourselves and starting to be and to love as God is. So God doesn't need any one of us. And yet God is desperate to be in an intimate relationship with each one of us. So detachment is this effort to love as God loves, which is completely unconditionally, which most of us find very hard to do, because most of our love is very, very conditional. But I guess 3 different things that we typically are attached to. And there are possessions, and the use of our time, and people. So possessions, I think for most people, they, as you go through the life process, you get to the point where you realize possessions are never going to make you happy all the time. And so becoming detached from our possessions is certainly the easiest of these 3. Because that doesn't have the ability to make me happy. So I can't say if I lose my possessions, I'm going to become unhappy. We know that as immortal beings, we're going to be living on infinitely. Finite objects can't make us happy. It's not possible. So turning away from them as the place we find our happiness is usually the easiest of the 3. The most difficult of the 3, I think, is our time. Because we're all pretty jealously guarding our time. We all know we have things that we like to do and things we don't like to do. And the stuff that we don't like to do, when we're called to do it and we have to respond and we know love is going to require that I do this thing, but we don't want to, then the question becomes, how am I going to get detached from this feeling like how I use my time today is going to make me happy or not? So if you imagine a person who has a job that they can't stand, maybe some of you have had those in your lives. Maybe some of you have them right now. You have a job, you can't stand this job. And you're thinking, I'm so attached to my time that doing this event each day, the content of my experience, is making me unhappy. It tells you you are attached to how you spend your time. Now, that's not to say there isn't a very good reason God might be calling you to quit that job and move on to something else. I'm not saying keep working in a bad job you hate. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying how you feel about how you have to use your time can tell you whether or not you're attached to it. And then what we might think is the most difficult one, this attachment to people, our spouses, our children. It can be a very confusing thing. I'm supposed to be detached from them. I thought I was supposed to love them more. And you are supposed to love them more. But this is where it becomes clear for us that loving and detachment, it's not the same thing. When you have an attachment that you know is improper, is when you say, I need this person, otherwise I will not be happy. Because now you've just placed that person above God on your scale. You said that for me to be happy, I have to have this person in my life. And then usually we follow that up pretty quickly with, and they have to behave this way. Because it's one thing to have this person, but boy, now they're doing, when we were dating, it was kind of like this, and then all of a sudden it got different, and I don't know how we get back there. This idea that what's happening in that relationship then becomes the thing. Are you happy? No, because my spouse is driving me crazy. They do this, that, and the other thing. And so now we're saying that I can't be happy because I have this disordered attachment because I was convinced that this person could make me happy. In fact, on our wedding day, didn't we tell each other that? Isn't that part of the vows somewhere? Like I promised to do it's kind of baked in there. It's not said, of course. That's not part of the vows. But in the back of your mind, that's what you're thinking this other person's job is. Your job is to behave in a certain way so I can be happy. And once we tell the other person, hey, God comes first, and I'm happy because of this relationship with God, we've just given them the best gift that we could ever give them. We have relieved them from the obligation to make us happy. I mean, that's an impossible burden to put on somebody else, no matter how much you love each other. It's an impossible burden to put on someone. So when you can tell them, I don't need you for happiness, what you're telling them is, I am detached from you. And then you have to convince them that's a good thing. I mean, go home to your spouse tonight on the drive home, just say, honey, I'm really detached from you. And then you say, well, let me define detachment. It's really important. We're going to give this long definition of detachment. And you say, it has nothing to do with love. I love you more than ever. And so we got to get those things right in our mind. It's not about loving less. It's about loving more honestly. It's about coming to the loving relationship from a place where you're already peaceful and happy. I mean, imagine if in all of your relationships, you didn't go to that relationship expecting something back. I mean, you just showed up open, giving, loving, free. How many relationships like that do you have in your life? Live from that place. You want to live a happy life? Enjoy the freedom that comes from knowing who you are. Sometimes we can be thinking that we can make a list of all the things I'm attached to. Food, vacations, people, type of car I have, all, how much money's in the bank account, all that stuff. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, maybe you could do that and say, I want to figure out what I'm attached to. And then say, I'm going to start one at a time. I'm going to take the top one. I'm going to work on that one. Like, I am so attached to this event that I like to go to every week, month, year. And when I can't go to it, I end up being grumpy for 2 weeks because it got canceled and now I'm frustrated. Or I have this get together with a friend and it's a set thing and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. And when it doesn't happen, I feel anxious and frustrated. Or when the family doesn't get together when it was supposed to, I'm frustrated. Or when the family does get together when they're supposed to, I'm frustrated. Whatever it is, figure it out on your list and say, I'm going to tackle one at a time. Because it's a big list, and I better start just chipping away at it. It's not going to work. Because even if you're successful in chipping away at that top one on the list, most likely you're just going to replace that with something else. Because ultimately, detachment is not an effort. It takes no effort to be detached. Because when you know who you are, that disordered attachment just immediately falls back into place. It's like this rubber band. It took an effort for the rubber band to stretch out and attach itself to something. But when the rubber band releases, there's no effort at all. It just goes right back to what it was. There's no effort at detachment when you know who you are. Because from the place of oneness with God, when you're no longer expecting happiness to come to you from events and from people and places and things, and instead you're bringing your open, free self to everything in your life, you know you don't need to be detached to anything anymore. So if you've been trying to do something that you want to kind of get out of your life or whatever, I would encourage you to stop giving so much attention to that thing and instead give yourself attention to this. Ask yourself the question, who am I? Really? Where does happiness come from? Really? And if you can slowly but surely make that transition, all these attachments are going to fade away. It's kind of like when we try to say, what should I do with the things that I want to stop doing in my life? What do I want to do with my sinfulness? I'm going to attack these sins. I would say, find peace and happiness and watch your sinful life disappear. Next time, when we come, we're going to get into the pretty practical stuff about microphones. And after we work that out, then we're going to talk about the practical things you can do in your life to make this reality yours. I talked tonight about changing my prayer life. I want to talk to you about some of the other things that I've done in my life that have helped me come to not just believe this intellectually, not just to have the felt understanding that this is who I am. You cannot change my mind. I know it to be true. It is who I am. And the result of that is this detachment. We're going to talk about those things next time. Thanks for coming.